So let's talk about the Apothecaries, Medics and Mad Doctors of Warhammer 40k, with a look at the healer class for each faction in the game that has one. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking medics and healers in Warhammer 40k, having a look at the guys whose job it is to put their soldiers back together after they all get broken, fighting some Tyranids or Orks or something. Medics and Apothecary class characters are a class that a whole bunch of factions in Warhammer 40k have, but not all of them, and have quite varied lore based on their factions and motivations. We might have Dour Space Marine Apothecaries providing medical aid and recovering the gene seed of their fallen battle brothers, or crazed Orc Painboyz having a lot of fun with their battlefield repair and heavy-handed stitching, putting the fallen boys back together in sometimes new and creative ways. In 10th edition, for the factions that have them, these tend to be represented by either attached characters in units or having a med pack of some sort being part of the squad. In 9th edition, quite a lot of special characters got separated out with things like Ravenwing Apothecaries or Grey Knight ones that then got folded into a base squad once again. Or they could just be an optional bit of war gear on a sprue, and I feel like at least a fair few of those come from kill team kits, given that they often have specialists, and often one of them might be a medic. In any case, usually these abilities tend to either restore X amount of models to a squad, maybe reviving D3 or something, or just putting one powerful model back on his feet, or otherwise might grant the unit a feel no pain type save, maybe a chance for the doc to fix things, even if a soldier was laid low by something that bypassed their armour. For this one, I thought it could be interesting to talk through the various factions out there that have one of these, roughly say what they are and what they do, and maybe give them a rough power rating out of 10 for ones that have them. For this one, I'm largely going to focus on the sort of healer class units, things that you'd imagine to be, say, apothecary equivalents, more so than, say, tech marines and warpsmiths, and various engineers out there that do the same sort of thing for vehicles and maybe some heavily armoured infantry of some sort or another. Let's jump into it though, and starting with the Space Marines, we've got the standard Apothecary. He's 50 points to field in game, and that gives you a 4 wound medic that can attach to a whole bunch of different squads in Tacticus armour. Most medic classes don't really tend to be all that great in close combat. He gets himself both an Absolver and a Reductor bolt pistol, so some slightly punchy damage too shooting up close. And then for his revival rules, when he's leading a unit, he can revive one destroyed model in the command phase, and when his bodyguard unit's destroyed, you get the consolation prize of gaining a command point on a 2+. I think the awkward thing for Apothecaries are that they can only lead squads that have 2 wounds generally, and often that means for the amount that you're putting into the unit, there's the chance that they just never get to use their healing abilities, and the squad just gets wiped out wholesale before the Apothecary even gets to trigger that once. And even if he does manage to trigger it once, it might not be enough to really justify the 50 point cost. Say for example, Hellblasters might be one of the best opportunities to use him, given that they might cause some chip damage on themselves, but even then restoring a 23 point Hellblaster to the unit is definitely not unhelpful, but that's far less than 50 points that you spent. As a result, people almost always tend to use other characters as force multipliers for Space Marine squads, particularly things that can amp up damage like Lieutenants. I have seen some people enjoy Apothecaries, maybe in more casual games a bit more typically. They can be okay leading Hellblasters. I feel like in general you're better off with other things for the most part though. I've given him a 5.5 out of 10 here. Next up, I will also mention the Apothecary Biologist. He is an apothecary but has the sort of more battlefield scientist and analyst sort of role, so his job isn't really putting Space Marines back together again. I thought it felt rude to make an apothecary video and not mention him though. In any case, he's 70 points, clad in Gravis armour, so can join things like Heavy Intercessors, Eradicators and Aggressors, and is fairly sturdy as a result, toughness 6 with 5 wounds and a 3+ save. Again, he gets his Absolver bolt pistol for 1 punchy damage 2 shots, and then he adds 2 things to his unit, being able to give them lethal hits, which is nice enough for all 3 of the units really in their own ways. And if the bearer's unit ever wipes something out in melee, then he becomes OC9 as well, so really quite a big weight on objectives for a character who already starts out with a bit more of that with OC3. The lethal hits can be handy enough on all 3 of the units. I feel like it was a lot more of a big deal when fire discipline was a thing, but he can still make things like Aggressors and Eradicators punch up a fair bit. The lethal hits could be good with some combos as well still, like maybe Heavy Intercessors when stationary in the Anvil Siege Force with an enhancement. He can also be quite a nice choice for getting certain enhancements into units as well. Say for example, he could have Blade Driven Deep in the Vanguard Spearhead, and use that way to get Calgar and him with a unit of Eradicators or Aggressors into the midboard to do some brutal first turn damage if desired. I feel like he was maybe a bit more standout at the start of the edition. After a fairly big points rise and fire discipline being made far worse, I'd rate him a bit lower than I would originally. I've given him a 7.5 out of 10 here. Next up, we've got the Blood Angels Apothecary in the Sanguinary Priest. He's 90 points and has a fairly similar stat line to the standard one. that despite his massively increased points cost, he does have far better buffing rules, giving his unit a 5+ feel no pain, and the Blood Chalice giving you an extra pip of AP in melee. Those are both good buffing rules, though the AP thing does mean that he maybe more wants to lead things that get mixed up in melee, so maybe the Assault Intercessors are the most obvious one, that maybe could be okay with Stern Guard, given that they can actually be genuinely quite scary in melee in a pinch against the Oath of Moment targets. You can also attach him to a unit while a captain's attached as well, which could make a very threatening, better AP and more durable squad, in addition to the big attacks of the captain, though at that point you've got a very expensive squad on your hands. Overall, I think he's got a very interesting data sheet, though his points cost is a fair bit too high right now. It just seems unlikely that you'd want him instead of, say, a captain if you were wanting a character to make Assault Intercessors or Stern Guard scarier. And it just seems like too much of an investment for 90 points on top of a character already, to add what he does to the unit, even if he does make one squad very chunky and hard to take out and hit harder. I've chosen to give him a 6.5 out of 10 here. I've not really seen any Blood Angels competitive list choosing to take him at all. Just feels like he needs a small points drop really. For the Dark Angels, they've got a squad apothecary in the Ravenwing command squad. They're 130 points and give you a squad of essentially 3 Black Knight profiles with their plasma talons, a really quite punchy champion with 6 attacks at damage 2, +1 to advance and charge built in, some extra OC, and the apothecary himself allows you to potentially restore really quite a valuable model to the squad, resurrecting Outriders or Black Knights. Between all that, they're a fairly scary general purpose boost to an Outrider squad or a Black Knight squad. Outriders definitely became a lot more interesting for them given the +1 damage thing on the charge, and are perhaps particularly good in company of Hunters, where they're probably the ones that you'd want to bear the enhancements and use them to get Black Knights or Outriders in position for various alpha strikes. I've chosen to give them a 7.5 out of 10 here. It feels like the apothecary is maybe a little bit of a nice bonus though, with the squad having the potential to bounce back big if the opponent does deal some serious damage to it, but doesn't fully wipe out the whole unit. Finally, for the main Space Marine apothecaries I wanted to look at, there's the Brotherhood Terminator squad for the Grey Knights. Again, they've got a squad apothecary that was rolled into the unit after previously being an independent character at one point. They're 200 points per 5 of them, have the chunky Terminator stat line, and Grey Knight shenanigans to be able to repeatedly warp around the board. Their squad rule is to gain lethal hits on the charge, which helps them punch up against tough stuff rather well, and they pair very nicely with Caldor Drago and his charge damage in particular. For the apothecary, again that's a rule to allow you to restore one destroyed model to a depleted unit, and I feel like as a Terminator model, that's a 40-point model that you're reviving, and also they're a squad that's a bit more likely to take damage but not be fully wiped out. Just given Terminators are both fairly durable and fairly points intensive, it definitely could have some good effect, and restore models to a unit can be pretty handy setting up for the next turn's movement and maybe charges if desired, as you could potentially put the model down somewhere to shorten a charge, or even put another body on an objective marker if it made sense to. In any case, Brotherhood Terminators are a fairly solid data sheet for the Grey Knights, often one of the ones that gets built around more given it's what most of the characters can attach to. I've chosen to give them an 8 out of 10 here. Before we move on to look at the rest of the Imperial Chaos and Xenos healers of the 41st millennium, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Titan's Terrain. One option for getting a battlefield full of Warhammer terrain on the board very quickly, and doing things a bit differently with their pop-up terrain design. The idea of their set is they've got 12 tiles put together to make a 45 by 60 inch board, so the right size for 2000 point games of Warhammer 40k. Each of those tiles folds out and up pops a building of one sort or another. Basically the idea being that the entire thing can fold flat and all fit within a box set that's the same size as a standard sized board game. Being able to fold flat and be so portable definitely comes with a few trade-offs. It's not going to be quite as sturdy or detailed as most terrain sets out there, but I feel like the portability and the fact that it's ready to go right from the word go are quite good selling points for it, particularly if you've got limited storage space or limited time to invest in the hobby side of a terrain set. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to give a look over their stuff, and I will cycle back to them at the end of the video as well to talk through their pros and cons a little bit more, and give examples of a few of their different sets that they have. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. For the other Imperial medics and healers though, next up we have the Guard medics. They've got a fair few squad medics, so I'll talk through them together a bit. The Deathcore Krieg being a kill team set have the option to either have 1 or 2 medics in the unit, and they allow you to get D3 downed Kriegsmen back into the fight in the command phase. If you have a big unit of 20 and 2 med packs, then it goes up to D3 plus 1. That could be interesting enough to restore plasma gunners that happen to have blown themselves up, or again put some more bodies on objectives, and I feel like for bigger squads of 20 of them, there's a bit more chance that they might take damage but not be outright wiped out. It is kind of funny that their medic rule might work kind of counterintuitively to potentially stop them getting their depleted unit damage bonus if it crosses one of those thresholds. so weirdly might sometimes make sense not to make use of it. Otherwise, there's medics that do kind of similarly that you can add in the Cadian Kaschan and Tempestus Scion command squads, generally healing D3 platoon or Scion models, and where there's the option to take them, such as the Kaschan and Tempestus ones, they are generally seen as worth taking, even if it does mean giving up one extra special weapon in the case of the Tempestus. Just having the chance to restore D3 Scions back on their feet is enough to be worth it. Otherwise, for Feel No Pains and medics, the Krieg Marshal could give a Feel No Pain type save, though he wasn't exactly a battlefield medic, and the Quartermaster Cadre, that's been in Legends for really quite a long time, was maybe a more dedicated guard medic style squad. They could also give a Feel No Pain type save as well with their rather creepy Medicae servitors. I'd say most of these are solidly good units. The Cadian Command Squad nice enough to broadcast orders around, maybe paired with Ursula Kreese. The Death Corps Guardsmen handy enough to advance into the midboard and have a bit more damage and punch compared with Cadians. A lot of people seem to like Cadians though for their sticky objectives when they're doing that. And certainly Tempestus command squads are really quite competitive right now in Guard Bridgehead Strike. You often see people spamming 3 of them there. And as mentioned, they do generally tend to take the med packs. Maybe out of the command squads, the Kaschan feels the most niche, given that Kaschan jungle fighters are generally used in units of 10 of them, and are more sort of expendable objective grabber guys, as opposed to ones that you want to buff extra hard. For other Imperial medics out there, next up we have the Adepta Sororitas Hospitaller. Kind of interesting in that both of her healing rules are at least fairly powerful, but just due to the nature of Sisters of Battle generally being units that deal their big damage and then get fully wiped out if they do get attacked, I haven't really seen anyone use Hospitallers in competitive lists. She gives her unit a 5+ Feel No Pain type save, and then for Sacred Healing she gets to restore 1 slain model to the unit, or if you sacrifice a miracle dice it can be D3 + 1 slain models, which if she ever did get to trigger that and burn a worse miracle dice, that could be quite a lot of points jumping back onto the board. Perhaps it could be kind of okay for Celestian Sacrosanct, a touch more durable than some of the other Sisters of Battle units out there, but in general the other characters tend to take precedent. Sisters of Battle have lots of supporting ones, maybe with things like Palatines and Caranesses being the first ones people tend to go for. Overall I've given her a 6 out of 10. Powerful rules, but just not really units that particularly want to use them as opposed to other things. Next up, we've got the Adeptus Arbites Exaction Squad from the Imperial Agents. They're 90 points for 10 Imperial Policemen with their Cyber Mastiff, and these guys are the fun, more sort of kill team upgrade style squad with a whole bunch of fancy gear. They can take a few fun special weapons in addition to their shotguns, get a marked target that they get lethal hits against, ignores cover for their shooting, a Nuncio Aquila to mess with enemies on objectives, and of course a medic guy as you can see here, restoring D3 models to the unit at the start of the command phase if they're depleted. In general they don't really tend to get taken all that much for Imperial Agents, just due to having really quite a lot of competing squads of sort of similar 4+ save chaff style squads. For the RBTs, the Subductors tend to get the nod first because they're genuinely quite durable with their big saves, and maybe Voidsmen at Arms tend to be the ones to go for the Imperialis fleet as they have some synergies with that. I feel like the Exaction Squad aren't crazily far behind, but might need to be a bit cheaper to compete. I've given them a 6 out of 10 here. Otherwise, for the rest of the Imperium, there's a few other examples. Maybe the Imperial Knights not so much, you don't really see the Knights going around and tending to each other's wounds. I guess the Admech Tech Priests can heal them a bit in their allied detachment. I'm sure I'll be missing a few of them, but for a roundup for a bunch of other Imperial medics, the Infiltrators can get a 6+ Feel No Pain via the Medipack, and they're really quite a competitive choice. Nice to have them just be a little bit more tanky versus standard Space Marines out there. Space Wolves don't get Apothecaries, and instead the role's kind of done by their Wolf Priests. In 10th edition they don't really have a dedicated data sheet, though previously they've had some sort of healing type rules when they've had one individually. Deathwatch maybe aren't so very different from core Space Marines with their Apothecary attachments. Black Templars too, although I guess they can get some Feel No Pain type saves from things like Grimaldus or the 10 Houses Bone enhancement, both of these more being inspiring to push through the pain as opposed to medics though. Blood Angels recently lost Brother Corbulo as a unique Apothecary character. He's now gone to Legends, but had similar sort of rules to the Sanguinary Priest, instead adding +1 attacks to the Bearer's units before the Codex update. Saint Celestine maybe doesn't feel like quite so much of a healer type unit, but I guess she's got some healing tiers. I feel like for any of the ones on here, she was probably the other major one that counts as a medic. Sisters in general aren't exactly having the best time at the moment, and I feel like Celestine is playable enough, though maybe not crazily standout. Admech in general tend to go more for battlefield repairs more so than medics. I guess the Tech Priest Dominus can add a 5+ Feel No Pain to a Breacher unit, and while I feel like maybe the Manipulus for the extra danger might be a bit more interesting, having an extra tanky Breacher squad is certainly a fun big threat that's hard to take out, and Adeptus Custodes don't really have a medic class unit of their own yet, though I believe the Sisters of Silence have one in the rules for the Heresy, but not something that's made a jump to 40k yet. Moving on to the Twisted Apothecaries of Chaos next though, and first up we have Fabius Bile, formerly of the Emperor's Children but now very much doing his own thing, improving upon the Emperor's work as he sees it, and making bigger, tougher and scarier Space Marines with his creations. In game, he's really quite hard to put down himself, with a 5+ Feel No Pain and Revive on Death, and between the skills of him and his Surgeon Acolyte, he amps up his bodyguard squads to +1 strength and +1 toughness, and also gets to cancel a damage inflicted on the unit each turn, so quite directly keeping some Space Marines on their feet there. He also does have a bit of interesting damage output in himself as well. The Rod of Torment for a bit of strength 5 and damage 3, plus an anti-infantry pistol, and he's perhaps particularly interesting at the moment for the Creations of Bile detachment, where he allows you to re-roll the choice of enhancements. That could be really quite a big deal if you either double up or you roll the ballistic skill 1 when you didn't want that one. Overall, he's pretty strong at the moment. I've given him a 9 out of 10 here. For the Death Guard, they've got their Plague Surgeon. He's a 50-point character from the Feet of Virion series of characters, getting a little bit more punch than some of the Apothecary equivalents out there, with a Bale Sword for 4 attacks at Strength 5, AP 2 and Damage 2, at least able to chip into the Plague Marine damage. His special rules are to revive 1 model to the squad, which is nice enough, but Plague Marines aren't exactly the most expensive troops in the world, and it does rely on them being damaged but not destroyed, which isn't always the case. His second rule is maybe a bit of an awkward one, perhaps not the most well thought through. He can basically heal other friendly infantry characters that are nearby to it, but that sort of rarely happens in 10th edition due to the characters being undamaged until they've had their bodyguard depleted, unless maybe someone took a sniper bullet or something. In general though, he tends to be regarded as maybe one of the worst of the support characters for the Death Guard versus all the rest. The damage output and restored models both genuinely aren't terrible, but it just doesn't really compare with the big damage that the Biologist Putrefier or the Foul Blight Spawns fight first, and his Plague Sprayer. And some of the rest have some interesting stuff as well, like the Tallyman. Overall, I'd give him a 5 out of 10 here. Not completely useless, but generally tends to get passed over for just about any other option. For the Thousand Suns, they've got an Exalted Sorcerer to restore the Rubricae to their feet. The on-disc Exalted Sorcerer can slow down enemy units with some helpful spells there, but the one on foot basically gets a Rebind Rubricae power. You roll a dice and on a 1, your squad takes D3 mortal wounds, but on a 2+, you get to restore 1 bodyguard model to the unit, and on a 6, you get to restore 2. The squad also gets a 4+ invulnerable save as well, and he can chip in with his own damage with Astral Blast. The healing rule is nice enough, though maybe a bit more relevant in bigger squad of Rubric Marines versus smaller squads, and I feel like if you were taking a single big squad, it might be a bit more tempting to take Ahriman as the leader instead of this guy. You could definitely have them be a fair bit chunkier and harder to remove though between the invulnerable save and the healing, though in general he maybe tends to be one of the slightly lesser played sorcerers out of the bunch of them. I've given him a 7 out of 10 here, though he's perhaps a little bit overshadowed by some of the rest. The Emperor's Children don't have Apothecaries, besides their one rather wayward one that decided to go off to the Chaos Space Marines and Fabius Bile, and that just leaves us with the World Eaters. And interestingly, they don't have an Apothecary but might well have one soon. We got loads of teasers that there might be a Berserker Surgeon coming for them at some stage, and I think at this point it might be a surprise if anything if they didn't get one of these in a 10th edition release. These guys have lots of lore in being the ones that make the 8-bound, maintain the Butcher's Nails, and keep the warbands just generally somewhat functional. If and when a model for one turns up, I guess they'll be able to lead Khorne Berserkers, and it would be quite nice to have another generic character option to lead them. We've yet to find out what World Eaters are getting for 10th edition at this point, but if this guy is turning up, it might not be all that very long away. Finally, for the Forces of Chaos, and certainly a lot less of a medic and more of a bringer of disease, we have the Great Unclean One, but nonetheless he does have a weapon option with that Doomsday Bell that can allow him to restore a Plague Bearer to a squad nearby. I feel like in general, Great Unclean Ones are nice enough, really big and tanky with 20 wounds with their Feel No Pain and Toughness 12, and in particular in the Demonic Incursion with their opportunity to get the 4+ Feel No Pain, and also go warping around the board to help with their mobility. In general though, the great big and unclean Nurgle medic sort of role for them doesn't really seem to be their main one. I've seen a couple of people use the Doomsday Bell, but it doesn't tend to be the preferred one versus the Bile Sword. The damage output is already kind of low with that, so it probably doesn't make sense to take away from that further, particularly when the reward is just potentially reanimating a Plague Bearer or two if there's even a squad nearby that's taking casualties. Overall really quite a strong unit, but maybe not so much because he can restore things. Finally, moving on to the Xenos though, and maybe halfway between mechanic and medic, we have the Spirits here, tending to their Wraithbone constructs of psychoactive material that contain real Aeldari souls. The Spirits here can become a lone operative when they're near Wraith units, mark an enemy unit for sustained hits 1, and help with the Wraith sight on their own datasheets, but in particular for the whole medic thing, have the Tears of Isha rule to allow you to restore a slain Wraith Guard or Wraithblade model, or heal D3 wounds otherwise. That's definitely a rule that has some potential to take effect, given that the Wraith units tend to be nice and tough and tanky, so they might well be injured without being outright destroyed, and particularly Wraithguard or Wraithblades could quite enjoy that for the extra threat range that you get with the extra model. In general, I'd say Spirit Seers are going to be interesting enough for some Aeldari detachments more so than others. Obviously, they'll be leading the way in the Spirit Conclave, or could be an option alongside multiple Wraith Lords, though lots of people will use them without. I've chosen to rate them a 7 out of 10 here, probably a bit more standout in Spirit Conclave than otherwise. Otherwise for the Aeldari, and technically a sort of medic if you're restoring souls from the dead pretty much. Next up we've got Evrain, the leader of the Inari, costing 100 points on the board, and she brings a powerful anti-infantry psychic attack, a few dangerous melee attacks, and buffs her unit with a reroll wound rolls, which is rather big. But for the sort of healer and medic type role, she's got the option to restore D3+1 bodyguard models to the unit in your command phase on the roll of a 2+. I feel like in general she's perhaps more worth it for the reroll wound rolls thing for a unit of incubi plus a fairly punchy psychic shooting attack. The bodyguard revival thing maybe feels like a bit of an extra bonus. Again, with toughness 3 infantry, even if the incubi have 3+ saves, there's at least a reasonable chance that a bunch of focus fire might well be able to wipe out the majority of the unit, if not all of them. So if they're exposed after taking something down, then they might just get wiped out. Overall, definitely a really powerful model though. Loads of Aeldari using Devoted of Iniad as their detachment. I've given her a 9.5 out of 10 for strength here. For the Orks, they certainly get some of the more fun medics out there in Warhammer 40k. The Painboyz is the Beast Snagger one, a 4 wound character that gets a 5+ feel no pain and also gives it to the Beast Snaggers, and can contribute a fair bit to melee damage as well with his Beast Snagger Claw with its anti-keywords. He also gets a Gross Orderly for a once per game revive D3 slain models, and one of those character style rules where he can heal a Beast Snagger character for 3 lost wounds, I guess potentially helping out a boss on Squigosaur or a regular beast boss, though I guess he's most likely to use it on himself if he maybe gets injured but not destroyed. In general, he tends to be a pretty rare sight to see in competitive lists, unfortunately, at this point's cost. People just tend to go for the beast boss, who really makes the unit rather next level with his big devastating wounds attacks to just wipe out monsters and vehicles, almost no questions asked. And I feel like it's maybe a little bit unfortunate in that beast snaggers already get a 6+ feel no pain, so the jump from going from a 6+ to a 5+ just isn't quite as big as if they didn't have one. Not absolutely unusable, but I think it's fair that you wouldn't want a beast boss in place of him. I've given him a 6.5 out of 10 here. For the Painboy, they're 80 points, and the decision to use them or not is generally for 20-man boys squads, particularly in Green Tide, where again he gives them a 5+ feel no pain, but again it's a lot more meaningful given that they don't actually have one to start with. He also gets the Gross Orderly to restore a bunch of models to the unit, and that can be a nice option to double down on with the Green Tide stratagem. He contributes an extra Power Claw to the unit, which does help their damage output a fair bit, and it will be fairly accurate if there's also a War Boss on the unit, and they can both join. And then finally he's got quite a fun Urti Syringe attack, where if he converts a wound on that, he can potentially get a massive D6 extra mortal wounds, potentially really helping out the mob against things like Terminators or other heavily armoured infantry. Overall, pretty solid character if you are taking a big 20 orc block, but probably not really worth it if less. I've given him a 7.5 out of 10 here, probably a bit higher than that in Green Tide. Finally for the Orcs, I thought I'd just mention the big mech in Mega Armor as well. Maybe not really fitting with the theme quite so much, as he's definitely more of a tech specialist than a medic, but I thought worthy of an honourable mention given that he can put Mega Knobs back on their feet. He does seem to basically function as a medic style unit for the Mega Knobs, both allowing you to regenerate one in the command phase and also using the Gross Oiler to heal D3 wounds on one once per game. Beyond that, you can either have a custom force field for Mega Knobs to make them harder to kill with a 4+ invulnerable save, or go for a teleport blaster for a fair bit of shooting. In general, I'd rate him a bit more mid for most orc lists out there, maybe about 7 out of 10. Maybe interesting enough for Bully Boys, but in Tactical Brigade he's absolutely top tier with the enhancement that he can take, often seen joining flash gits and giving them spectacular enormous rerolls. He tends to be the mech of choice to help them out there, and can interestingly enough even use his fixing the armour up rule to heal slain flash gits at the moment, which probably wasn't very intentional. Otherwise for the Necrons, I guess the roles of Engineer plus Medic are a bit overlapped given that they're all rather made of living metal anyway. The Technomancer feels near enough though, giving his unit a 5+ feel no pain, healing a model for D3 wounds, and this is all in addition to their general reanimation as well. At the big points cost that he has of 85 points now, he's basically a choice for the Wraiths and not really anything else. A unit of 6 of them with a Technomancer is fairly spectacularly tough to take out though, and in particular does really well in Canoptech Court, lots of good stratagems to help them out with, and an enhancement that can allow them to set up in the mid-board if that makes sense, and be a big tough nuisance unit that could do some first turn charge things and force the opponent to deal with their enormous durability right away if they wanted. I've given him a 7.5 out of 10 overall, definitely better in Canoptech Court than elsewhere though. For the Drukhari, they've got their homunculi to put the racks and their flesh creations back together. The regular generic character one gets a Master of Pain ability, giving their unit a 4+ feel no pain, so racks that can shrug off quite a lot of damage there. And overall he does make his unit a fair bit more durable, though partly due to his own profile with 5 wounds with a 5+ feel no pain as well. He contributes a few anti-infantry precision attacks as well, so could maybe be alright at trying to assassinate the odd character. In general though, just adding a bit more durability to a cheapish troop style unit doesn't usually tend to make the cut versus a whole bunch of other options that the Drukhari have. I feel like it's not awful between his stats and buff, but maybe doesn't tend to be a focal one all that often. I've given him a 6.5 out of 10 here. Perhaps a fair bit better is Urian Rakarth, the Master Homunculus that Games Workshop really needs to get around to making a new model for at some stage. He's 80 points and is even tankier individually with a 4+ feel no pain and a 4+ invulnerable save. Similar sort of melee damage and a once per game casket of flensing ranged attack. He really does the medic thing and restoring wounds rather well though. His fleshcraft can allow you to add an extra 3 wounds onto a Talos, Kronos, Grotesques or Rax unit, for the Rax restoring 3 models as opposed to 3 wounds. That's quite a nice ability given that Talos are pretty effective, and between his own toughness and a revive on death on a 2+, he's adequately tanky that you can run him solo if you'd like to. He does seem to see a bit of play in a few Drukhari army lists. I've given him an 8 out of 10 here. Finally, we've got the other Xenos factions, most of which don't really have quite so dedicated melee characters. The Genestealer cults can maybe restore some models, but not really so much via the administrations of medics. Cult icons can make things like neophytes and acolytes bounce back in quite a big way, say D3+3 neophyte hybrids healed on objectives. Certainly could be a big punishment for the enemy half killing them in any case. The Acolyte Icon Ward can give a unit a 5+ feel no pain as well, but more through inspiring devotion in their throng as opposed to trying to put them back together or anything. The Leagues of Votann get a field medic in their Hearthkin Warrior squad. A 6+ feel no pain doesn't hurt on top of their toughness 5 I guess. I feel like it's a bit incidental as opposed to be pivotal to what the unit does though, and they often still just get split in half in Sagittars and a more objective grabbing contents of that as opposed to being anything stand out in their own terms for damage and defense. For Tyranids, they maybe don't really have a dedicated medic, but perhaps the closest thing might be the Assimilation Swarm detachment. That basically turns a whole bunch of their Harvester keyword units into melee to patch up Tyranids of all shapes and sizes, and it got a fair bit more powerful now that they no longer have to be on objective markers to do that. The Harvesters are Rippers, Pyrovores, Psychophages, the Non-Assimilator and the Haruspex, all of which can be solid enough to make a chunky Tyranid regenerating army in this one. And while it's not one of the more played of the Tyranid detachments, I think mainly due to the model requirements, a few people playing it do seem to have been having some alright success at tournaments. I guess beyond that, you can restore gaunts as well, maybe from a Turvigon, but that's more birthing more as opposed to fixing them. I guess for Tyranids it's more about sending in more numbers as opposed to being too worried about the individual gaunts that you threw to whittle down the enemy's ammunition. Finally, the Tau don't really do medic characters quite so much. I guess Ethereals can grant feel no pains, and maybe warn it in a unit of Strike Marines on a home objective isn't an awful choice even if it doesn't get played too much in competitive. Battlesuits could do a bit of stim injecting in the retaliation cadre, but in general a medic and healer class isn't really one that they've got. I guess they do have a big focus on their technology and battlesuits more so than their flesh and blood. That just about rounds it off though, with each of the Xenos factions talked about in brief. Let me know what you make of the various healers, apothecaries and medics out there in Warhammer 40k. Which of these make the cut in your list and which do not. As always, I look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments below, and let me know any of them that I might have missed. I have a feeling that there'll be some. Finally, to round off the video, I'll just cycle back to Titan's Terrain in the video sponsor. As mentioned, one option for getting 40k terrain on the battlefield or very quickly with their folding pop-up cardboard terrain system. For a few pros and cons for their terrain system, as mentioned, the fact that it can fold flat means that it's fairly easy to store and transport, or packing away in a box set the same size as a standard board game. The price on it is far cheaper versus Games Workshop terrain, at least somewhat comparable to MDF, and unlike most terrain pieces, it doesn't need painting or assembly, it's ready to go immediately straight out of the box. For the common criticisms and downsides for it, it's generally a bit less sturdy and hard wearing versus say plastic or MDF terrain, given that it's made of cardboard. Being designed to fold flat does have its trade-offs. It can also be a bit trickier to put models in the top floors of ruins and things like that, and the grid layout has some criticisms as well. Maybe for 40k 10th edition, creating a few too many firing lanes. I feel like it's maybe not the worst idea just to have maybe like 1 or 2 extra bits of ruins that you can just break them up a bit with. It doesn't really make tournament approved layouts, but for one solution for a casual game, I think it does its job okay. In any case, if you did want to give their stuff a look, they've got a few different sets. They've got a Forgotten Furnace themed one with a bunch of Chaos Glowing runes and Blasted Factories. There's a maybe more traditional ruined city with the Shattered Hive one, or bombed out buildings and armoured containers and the like. And then a more verdant ruin set with the Overgrown Capital, maybe a set of ruins that could be a bit more appropriate for both Warhammer 40k and fantasy settings like Sigmar. Finally, each of those has the option of an expansion centerpiece set, where you make one great big building by pushing 2 tiles together. There's a cathedral one for the city and the capital, and an infernal spire for the foundry. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring the video. There'll be links down in the video description below if you'd like to check out their stuff. I'll leave this one here for now though. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Look forward to hearing your takes. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. And if you'd like to help support the creation of new videos, the channel does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to check it out. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening though, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.